we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with these two scriptures, one in Matthew, one in Luke. Okay, Matthew 6:24. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and like the other, or he will honor one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, which means wealth. Okay, now we have Luke's version of this, and it'll help us to understand a little more. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and like the other, or he will honor one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Well, now, Luke embellishes a bit, and so he adds, when the Pharisees heard all this, because they loved money, they ridiculed him. But Jesus said to them, you are the ones who make yourselves righteous before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is highly esteemed among men is disgusting in the presence of God. Okay, now let's do some background on this. And first of all, let's remember Jesus is speaking to people in the ancient Near East, and he's speaking to people who would understand this this idea about two masters, because he is describing a common situation. Okay, households, just households in general, had 3 or 4 families or more. Okay, all in one house, and you can imagine, just even with 2 wives, you know, that's just the example. And there was older brothers, and they were always trying to tell the servants what to do, and so the servants became very confused. So that's why it's stated like this, because that was the culture, and the people that were listening knew what he was talking about. So his listeners knew exactly what he was talking about when they said you can only have one master. Okay, and we've added in here because we're talking about remember the kingdom here, and the guidance, we're talking about the kingdom of God. And so basically what we're saying here is there's one master, and it should, your guidance, your direction should come from that master. And of course, with the kingdom, it's God. Okay. All right. And then we go on with Luke a little more. And he said to his disciples, beware of all covetousness, because life does not depend on abundance of health. I mean, of wealth, I'm sorry. Okay, so what we're saying here, and what we're going to be talking about, is greed. Watch out against greed. And the love of money. Okay, because therein lies the real meaning of this. So, all right, now Luke also has has the parable of they call it the rich fool. All right. So let's then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man brought him a great many crops. Okay. And he reasoned within himself, saying, what shall I do? For I have no place to gather my crops. So he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and rebuild them and enlarge them and gather there all my wheat and my good things. And I will say to myself, soul, you have many good things stored up for many years. Rest, eat, drink, be merry, and be happy. But God said to him, oh, you short-sighted man. Now, this is a parable now, remember. This very night, your life will be demanded of you. And these things which you have prepared, to whom will they be left? And that's essentially the end of the parable. But Luke adds, such is he who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich in the things of God. So, um, so we have the mammon. This guy laid this guy laid up his treasures, and he was he was well. I guess you can use the word greed. Okay, he was he was thinking of himself, and he was had all this stuff prepared for himself, and not thinking of the ways of God or um, or what his responsibilities were with regard to the community. So let's read this to get a better understanding. All right. Money is scarce in the Near East, and a man's wealth consists mainly of produce such as wheat, barley, beans, and cereals. Easterners consider a man who has many barns as wealthy, and they envy his position. Owing to luxurious living and the comforts of life, some of these men forget their God and their religious principles. They scorn others who have not succeeded in producing rich and abundant crops, as they have done, and are very happy when lean years happen. Their neighbors and friends are compelled to beg for supplies from these wealthy men. The wealthy were to share with the community. So, the problem here isn't just that, okay, you can't be rich. That you know, people take this literally and steadfastly and say, okay, can't be rich. If you're rich, and it's kind of like it's kind of like well, my mother and I know other people would always say, based on these things, well, I'm so glad I'm not rich because, well, because rich people were not going to go to heaven, and that's how many poor people uh, view this. Okay, and but the idea was, okay, back then the communities, they didn't have welfare and they didn't have this help and this support. Okay, the communities were to help each other and to contribute to each other. But you see here, um, okay, he was saving all of his and putting all his up, and the poor had to come and beg for him, except that he didn't last very long. But that's the way it was. the poor had to come and beg for him. And so Jesus said, well, you know, uh, you can't, uh, essentially what he said is you cannot put your wealth first. You have to put God first. So we have some more explanations of this. All right. But to make it more clear, we're going to go to Mark 10, 17 to 27. Now, um, and this is going back again to what we talked about a couple weeks ago, that it's not enough just to be able to say, oh well, I keep those commandments. That's but it it it's not enough. There's more to it. So Mark 10, 17 to 27. Okay, while Jesus was on the way, a man came running and fell on his knees and asked him, saying, "Oh, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit life eternal?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? There is no one who is good except the one God." Now, so Jesus then is saying to the man, you know the commandments. Do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not murder, do not bear false witness, do not oppress, honor your father and mother. But he answered and said to him, "Teacher, all of these I have obeyed from my boyhood." And Jesus looked at him and loved him. Okay, he didn't criticize him, he didn't condemn him. And he said to him, "You lack one thing. Go, sell everything you have and give it to the poor, and you shall have a treasure in heaven. And take up your cross and follow me." But he felt sad because of this saying, and he went away depressed, for he had great wealth. Now, once again, Jesus was just testing this man. This isn't where it says, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. That's not to be taken as solid cement. Of course, many people believe that God said this because God wrote the Bible. Okay, and then they say, well, okay, Jesus, Jesus said to sell everything, and I know a kind of family member, not real close family, but they get into they got into religion and the Bible stuff and everything, and they just literally did this. They just got rid of everything they had. They sold and whatnot, but of course they had no means of living, and they always had to come back to whatever. But don't take this as a solid, sell everything and give it to the poor. He was testing the man because he knew the man was wealthy, and the man just, uh-uh. And if you think about it, okay, think about it if that were now, and if that were you, um, and if you were wealthy, and we have these problems all the time that we have to kind of decide, because you know our world, at least in this country, after at least in this country, uh, I mean we're it's you know trying to get wealth and trying to get as much as you can and whatnot. I mean that's kind of the American way. And I don't mean that as criticism, but I mean, but it kind of is. And so many people today would have the same feeling, I think, as the man did because he had great wealth. So, okay, now let's break this down a little bit because this is favorite passage of one of you, I know. And it's also can stand by itself because Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? There is no one who is good except the one God." Now, what there this gets confusing too in the Western Christian world because Jesus um, Jesus in the Western Christian world is considered to be God. Okay, there's no in the Eastern and what we teach. Jesus was a human being. He was a man, just like the rest of us. And so here is where he's demonstrating that because Jesus attributed to everything to God. Even when he did his healings, it wasn't Jesus that was doing the healing. Jesus was the instrument, but it was always God. And Jesus did not, Jesus could not be flattered. He did not he did not boast. Uh, and so this is just a good standalone verse to, um, to demonstrate that. Okay. And now another some other favorite passages. All right. Then Jesus looked at his disciples and said to them, "How hard it is for those who have wealth to enter into the kingdom of God." But the disciples were surprised at his words, and Jesus answered again, saying to them, "My sons, how hard it is for those who trust in their wealth to enter into the kingdom of God." And the famous passage here, it is easier for a rope to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. But they were the more astonished, saying among themselves, "Who then can be saved?" Jesus looked at them and said to them, "With men this is impossible, okay, but not with God. For everything is possible with God." What a great verse right there. Just everything is possible with God. Okay, now let's look at this. All right, this is the famous one where the King James version and many of the other versions and in English say it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. All right, so here again we've got this literal thing, and when you say it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, it implies impossibility. Okay, um, and this verse, all right, comes from all right. The word for camel and rope is gamla. Okay, now this is one of these situations where you learn about the Aramaic language, where almost every word in the Aramaic language has several meanings. All right. And to determine which meaning was appropriate, it took somebody like Dr. George Lamsa, who spoke the language, knew the culture, and therefore has come up with these make much more sense interpretations. And this is one of the key ones. So when you say that a camel to pass through the eye of the needle, well, I mean it implies impossibility. But when you have a rope, okay, it's possible. And I just put this little picture here, and notice before we go ahead and read what it's all about. Notice the little, I call them shards. When you put a thread through a needle, a lot of times it it, it splits off with other little shards. So let's read about this because this is the meaning. All right. When a thick cord or heavy thread is passed through a needle, some of its fibers come off. And by the way, when it's saying rope, we're used to thread going through a needle, but the needles that he was referring to were big, heavy wooden needles. They used them for the ships and whatnot, and then they used the big needles for their tents and whatnot. So we're talking. That's why he's saying rope, not thread, although that's the way it's written here. So a rich man must therefore learn to share some of his luxury. He must surrender his overt love for money, which creates greed, so that he may enter into the kingdom of heaven. All right. Now, let's talk some more when we talk about entering the kingdom of love. Okay. To enter the kingdom means to participate in the principles of the kingdom. All right. And through that participation in the kingdom, what you have essentially is heaven on earth because it's now. You participate in the principles now. You practice the teachings now, and you've already entered the kingdom of heaven or God, and no problem. So, but this can be very difficult and challenging for some rich men. Thus, the saying, it is easier for a rope to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. It was not impossible, just difficult. Um, so what Jesus was doing, Jesus in this instance was censuring certain types of rich men who had made wealth their God, were free from paying taxes, and who oppressed the poor. As a prophet, Jesus was not against riches, but against an all-consuming love of riches. These men abused their position of wealth. Therefore, it would be difficult for them to practice the principles of the kingdom. Now, before I do that, I have a closing thing. As I was doing this, um, just a couple. Well, we'll go ahead and read the thing, and then the final conclusion, and then I hope some of you will have some comments. I have a couple questions here. Okay, Jesus contradicted the ways of the greedy rich of his day, who very often did not pay their laborers proper wages, nor share their wealth. He never spoke against the ways of the pious rich, the ones that did follow the principles of the kingdom. These men of integrity were true agents of God, who were entrusted with God's wealth so that they might distribute their gains among the needy and poor. Now, let's do this, and then I'm going to toss it out. All right, let's see. We have thank you much for your contributions. And these are the two commentaries for Jesus' teachings. Now, I mean, John is another story, but these are the two commentaries that we use. Okay, now question: let's think about this. And think about what Jesus taught here. And you know how people talk and say, well, boy, if Jesus would come back today. Well, based on what we just learned, how do you think Jesus would fare?